Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Data Explosion in Your Organization? Harness It with Comprehensive Records Management Strategy. I'm Teresa Resick, the Director of Online Events here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are John Mancini from AIIM, and we also have Nishan De Silva from Microsoft 365. Microsoft is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the widgets that we have available for you. Group chat is available, and you will open that by clicking on the icons along the bottom. And with group chat, you will be able to text chat with each other and also with a few of us from here at AIIM. Do ask questions of our speakers throughout our time today using the Q&A feature, and we will hold these until the end where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them, but you can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list. And there's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. So just click in there at any time, and that resource will open in a new browser tab, and you can save it and read it after the webinar. At the end of this webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and it's also in the widgets below in the slide area. And I would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback, because I really do read each and every comment that you make. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And right now I'd like to introduce the speakers who will be joining us here today. And John Mancini is the Chief Evangelist of AIIM, and he is a well-known author and speaker on information management and digital transformation. And as a frequent keynote speaker, John offers his expertise on digital transformation and the struggle to overcome information chaos. He blogs under the title Digital Landfill and has published scores of ebooks, many of which can be found at AIIM.org/research. And Nishan De Silva is a Principal Engineering Lead in Office 365 Information Protection Team. He is the lead for Advanced Data Governance Workstream in Microsoft 365 platform. He is focused on creating various features around information governance, records retention, and GDPR compliance for customers across various industries. And right now I'm going to turn things over to John Mancini from AIIM to begin our talk today. John?
Thank you, Teresa, and welcome everybody. As I look at this slide with the pictures of Nishan and I on here, I think that we probably have aged in this question of tackling the data explosion. So we look pretty young here in this picture, Nishan, but we nonetheless will plow ahead here in the things that we want to talk about. So we're going to talk about 3 things today, and there's a lot we could talk about relative to the data explosion, but these are the 3 in particular we want to touch on. And the way that we will do this today is that I will tee up some data from some of our industry studies relative to each of these 3 points, and then I'll turn it over to Nishan to get his perspectives on those data points and his perspectives on how Office 365 deals with some of the issues that I raised. And then we'll also have a demo a little bit later on. So we've got a jam-packed full agenda here. So the 3 things that we're going to talk about today is, first of all, if you have a data explosion coming into the organization, then this question of figuring out where the content is that you want to save, where is the content that's redundant, obsolete, and trivial, how do you make differentiation between the 2? Those issues become increasingly important moving forward. Second thing is talk a little bit about some of the governance issues that people find the most challenging in our surveys. And then Nishan will talk a bit about how those map against some of the current and future Office 365 governance capabilities. And lastly, delve a little bit further into the future in terms of talking a bit about machine learning and how you detect and classify sensitive data. So that's the topics for today. I'm really excited to be here today. And so without further ado, let me hop into the first one. and share some data with you. And all the data that I'll share is from AIIM's Industry Watch surveys. And so as you think about that, those are all available to members online. You can download those and take a look at them. But the piece that is really interesting to me is I asked a question in one of our surveys this year in which I asked the exact same question that we asked 10 years ago. And so there's been a lot of improvements in content management since then. And yet when we ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible and 10 excellent, for their overall effectiveness in managing, controlling, and utilizing electronic information, what we found is that there hasn't really been much of a change in terms of organizational self-assessment of where they are, which says to me that one of the reasons for that is that people are running faster and faster in order basically to stay in the same place, which carries with it the implication that something needs to change in terms of how they go about this task because the nature of the challenge, the size of the data explosion coming into the organization has changed so dramatically. So when we ask this question, how do you ensure that personal information in email, SharePoint, shared drives is deleted when appropriate? This was from a GDPR survey that we did. And what we found there is that most organizations, look at that 18%, we have no procedures for this, 40% we have manual procedures. Less than 40% basically said that they have any kind of automated procedures within their records management system for ensuring that personal information in email, SharePoint, and shared drives is deleted when appropriate. So that's kind of point one, is that there's a lot of manual practices out there. Second point is that when we ask this question, and CGOC, the Corporate Governance Oversight Council, does a lot of good work in this, and so I wanted to test one of their data points, which is the percentage of rot, the percentage of redundant, obsolete, trivial information that people feel is in their organizations. And so what you find here is that almost 40% of organizations say that at least 40% of the information in their organization, is rot. So pretty high percentage and a pretty high challenge for organizations to deal with. This is another question from a different survey, actually one we haven't released yet, which also probes that question of manual practices. And so when we ask people to talk about eliminating and rot and also retaining the things that you want to retain, how automated a process is it, how manual? You can see this data, those red bars at the bottom, 26, 50, 62% basically reporting back that their processes and their strategies for dealing with this is pretty manual right now. So let me turn it over now to Nishan, and Nishan's going to talk a little bit about Microsoft's way of thinking about this whole set of issues. Nishan?
Thanks, John. Really interesting to see as you talk about ROT. I'll give a couple of examples where we are investing. But let me take a quick step back. And as we think about Office 365, our whole goal and mission is to really make productivity be the priority, the first, and not be disruptive. And now what I like to talk to you more about is you no longer have to choose between productivity and compliance. And as we go through for the next few minutes, I'll kind of tell you some of the areas we're investing in. As we think about compliance and productivity, we want it to be built into the productivity service. So for example, as part of our suite-wide solution, in one location you can manage all your security and compliance requirements for things like SharePoint, Exchange, Modern Groups, OneDrive, and of course, Microsoft Teams. So as we look at these areas, there are three pillars that we are investing in. So John, you talked about ROT. One of the things we hear from our customers is we want to import high-value data into Office 365. But as we bring that data in, how do you actually bring third-party data? How do you have native connectors to bring that data in? And as you bring that data in, how do you actually go through some kind of ML model to actually synthesize the data and look at what is important to you, bring it in, what is not, get rid of it. Second pillar is around in-place data governance. In the past, in the world of content services, we see a lot of information moving all over the place with different systems, different sources. Our goal is to really keep the data in place and govern it and classify the data you want to classify, retain it for the period you need to retain it. Also, not only do classification and retention, but how do you also protect and secure your data? Finally, monitoring. This is a really important pillar because if we don't give the insights and the analytics and the intelligence, what is actually happening with your data, that's really no value. So we really have been investing a lot on proactive supervision, where for financial organizations that have to comply to regulations, how do you monitor data and give insights? How do you do supervision on data for even internal, looking at internal threats, harassment? So there are all these capabilities that we are building in through machine learning to make sure that you can also give insights. And for content services and records, it's also important for us to give you what is actually happening with your data, how do you reclassify data, etc. So this is kind of a pretty hot area that we are looking at. How do we actually look at Office 365 with these three pillars, John? How, as you bring that data in, not only you want to bring it in, you want to govern it, and also be able to see some monitoring. Over to you, John.
So when you think about this, I think, one of the things that maybe you could just comment quickly on, Nishan, is how does the nature of the challenge that people face when you look at this import, govern, monitor trifecta that you have here, is how does that change in a content services environment versus a traditional ECM environment?
Yeah, we started, looking at, as we look at, you can imagine, right, Office 365, we have customers, John, who are the small companies from 3 to 4 people, all the way to our enterprise customers that hundreds and thousands of employees. But we started looking at various verticals and realized some of the trends that you were talking about, the patterns are similar to whether you're a highly regulated organization or if it's just even a small company that's non-regulated. So when you look at this, we started talking to some of our customers and looking at it from an ECM point of view. You can see, like, these are 3 testimonials, one from a healthcare provider about how you want to manage your data and easy to bring that data in, legacy data that's imagined. A healthcare provider has so much legacy data, but that's high-value data that they still need to secure and protect for the duration of the retention. And then you think about an oil and gas organization who want to still be collaborative, be able to continue to work if they're working on manufacturing plants or how they have to comply to regulations. These records need to be retained, sometimes permanently, sometimes for 30, 40 years. So that's one of the things that we are trying to do versus moving that data. You are here seeing some of these customers governing that data in place. And I mentioned to you earlier, this is a fascinating area, John, that you and I have been in this industry for a long time. We are seeing more and more customers saying, okay, now that we have this data, give me some intelligence of this data, give me some insights. How do I actually start building some trends around it? So this is a hot area that we are seeing when it comes to monitoring. Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah, no, I think that that's a nice dovetail into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is this question of some of the governance challenges that people face. And when you think about that tension that you talked about between the need for knowledge workers to collaborate and to work effectively without really thinking too much about governance or about records management, and yet at the same time think the organizational priority to control the information and act in a responsible fashion, that's one of the key tensions, I think, that exists in organizations right now. So when you think about the challenges that are out there, there's a couple I wanted to highlight here. The first one is that people are obviously, particularly in an AIM community, spending time and money on these issues right now. And they're trying to figure out how they spend that time and money more effectively, given that the nature of the challenge is growing more challenging rather than less over time. And so you can kind of see the two twin pillars, if you will, of traditional content management, records management and digital preservation and business process management as really being the primary things that people are trying to balance in their organization. So when they think about this balancing act, there's a lot of tension points out there. The first one is that most organizations still don't have a strategic approach to how they think about privacy in their organization. And I think if GDPR has taught us anything, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of privacy concerns that are beginning to well up in organizations. You can't really get away with a manual approach to that anymore, and yet most organizations still do manage that in a manual way, and they're trying to figure out how they get away from that, but do it in a way that doesn't overly encumber the productivity of knowledge workers. Another issue that's out there that people are wrestling with is this question of content sprawl and just the sheer number of content management, document management, records management suppliers that their organizations have. As you can see, we asked this question 5 years ago, and on average the number of systems and the number of content management providers that people use has increased over the course of the last 5 years, which points to that traditional information silo problem that we have in this industry in terms of balancing the need to deploy a process solution in the context of a particular process and yet act a little bit more agnostic than that when it comes to managing the content associated with that process. Third, another set of issues out there is this question of content that's locked up in process-specific applications. So this is another question that we asked 5 years ago to see if it's gotten better or worse. And a lot of words on this slide, but the real point of this is to ask people how much of the content that they need to run their ERP systems, their HR systems, their finance systems, their CRM systems, all the different kinds of core business systems that people use on a day-to-day basis to get their jobs done. How much of the content is locked in those systems versus enabled through a content management system? And what we can see is that issue of integration challenges still exists, and governance is a key element in terms of attacking some of those issues moving forward. And so as you think about this, the last piece maybe to talk about, I think, and it really is a dovetail into some of the things that is going on with Office 365 right now, is that there is this rising awareness that traditional approaches to the problem are outdated, that organizations feel that their information management strategy needs to be modernized to deal with the modern nature of the problems that they have. And what you can see here, and we've asked this question a number of times this year, and you overwhelmingly get the answer, yes, we do need to modernize. You also wind up with a little bit of more challenge when it comes to the how question related to modernization. So maybe why don't you talk a little bit about one vision of how you might go about this question of modernization.
Thanks, John. I think one of the key things that we've been hearing as the digital transformation is happening in organizations, as you mentioned, multiple customers have multiple systems, and they're like, how do I actually, when I bring that data in, how do I actually manage that data? So the data challenge is really tough, right? But we are delivering a comprehensive information protection and a governance solution designed to protect data that is important to you. So we want to make sure that when we are protecting and governing this data, there are three things we look at. One is what is the business value of the data? What is the legal value of that data? What's the regulatory value of that data? So that way, we want to make sure that we are giving our customers options how to classify this data. So one of the concepts that we introduced is this labeling concept. So we are delivering a unified approach to labeling, which is the way to discover your data, how do you classify your data that's important to you, then add various security capabilities such as encryption, permission, do not share outside your organization. So you can see, John, that not only we are going to be looking at no longer in the world of modern ECM was really about how do you manage your content, how do you retain your content. We are adding that third layer, which is about come and we can classify the data, we can retain it, but we also can give you some of the security capabilities. So now we have this unified suite across our entire Office 365 suite. Not only that, we can also do classification on-premise, in file shares, and also in external systems. So this is where you can see that when we start looking at our data classification, we are taking a very holistic view. Now let's talk a little bit about, there are two things we do. One of the key guiding principles for us is that if we make this difficult, then we are back to the same problems we've been having for the last 20 years. So we really are focused on the simplicity of how you can create these policies from a unified console. An administrator, whether it's a privacy officer, a records manager, a security officer can very quickly create these policies and push them out to the various workloads. But also when those classifications are available, if you, as a highly regulated organization, sometimes you still may need to manually classify information. But we also provide automation where you can do auto classification of these policies. And later on, I will actually show you some of the machine learning capabilities that we can do to classify that information. So with that, I also want to talk about when we look at classification, something that's really has been, of course, personal to my own heart, which is records management. Because when you start looking at classifying information, we heard from customers over and over again, Microsoft, what is your strategy for records management? Because that is a significant amount of our data when we start classifying are some things that are records. So we made some significant investment in the last 18 months, and we are going deep into records management. So from content lifecycle, from creation, all the way to retaining information, all the way to automatically disposing, also manually disposing. So let me walk you through a couple of things that we just released a couple of weeks ago. Lots of customers have been asking us about, we have a file plan, a retention schedule that is about 500 retention categories. How do I easily bring that in and have hierarchical file plan? So really excited to announce that we made this announcement 2 weeks ago, but now we are going to support a file plan manager. We also, John, you talked about business process automation. So we also have event-based retention, and where we can actually trigger events, work with SharePoint Flow for you to connect to whether it's SAP or Workday or any other business application and start managing records. Number 3, key area that we invested is that record declaration was a really important area where every organization had a different type of way of, you can be simple as retaining information. Second was about declaring something a record. Number 3, we also wanted to make sure that some organizations, especially in the regulated world, said we want a regulatory record that can be worm compliant to meet some of our regulations like SEC 17A-4, etc., where it has to be immutable. So there are many capabilities that we have invested so far. So you can see that as we are doing these capabilities, something that also triggered to us was that we have seen in the industry, and personally with my own journey in this area, most people don't declare records. So what we've done is really invested significant amount of time on auto-classifying records. So something super exciting that we did was many of our customers said we've invested significant amount of time with SharePoint, and where we want to use content types, we use custom metadata fields to actually work to create a life cycle of records. So also a couple of weeks ago, we now support over 30 metadata fields in SharePoint where you can set up various capabilities and map to the retention engine that we have. goes beyond SharePoint, etc. So really exciting to see that how we've taken what we have done with SharePoint and then also mapped to what we've done with retention labels to bring these two products together. Again, going back to that concept about how can we continue to provide you built-in capabilities in the platform.
You know, this slide, Nishan, is really of interest to me. You know, I think about the history of this space, and the history of this space has been one in which we've ignored the fact that, by and large, the folks on the left-hand side of the slide don't really care that much about what occurs on the right-hand side of the slide, and vice versa. And so, you know, what you're talking about is, you know, we've made these assumptions that somehow knowledge workers and information workers are going to, you know, grandly go along with us in our desire to classify and to, you know, declare records and assign metadata and all of that. And the reality is that we've, you know, for the most part, we haven't done that well on that front. And so some of the things that you're talking about there relative to making this automatic and making this invisible to the knowledge worker, I think are really exciting.
Yeah, and just to highlight, one of our customers that presented with me 2 weeks ago at Microsoft Ignite was Shell, where they just felt that it was easy for them to create default folders, default libraries, so that records management is just seamless. It just happens, versus that someone has to go on the weekend and start declaring records. So just thinking about that auto classification, making it simple, is something that we are seeing more and more customers excited about.
One last question. You know, when you talked on the previous slide about information that has business value, it has legal value, it has regulatory value, it has compliance value, you know, that really begs the question that one of the challenges that organizations have is that those different sources of value have different stakeholders, and so it becomes a political and change management process in order to get them all on the same page. Anything that came out of Ignite that, you know, you'd want to share about, you know, how organizations view that change management process, and how do they make it work?
A really good question, John. In fact, this was a top-of-mind question that came up 2-3 weeks ago. And we've been hearing where most of these capabilities, as I've been talking from an administrative point of view, you go to our security and compliance center, and then you are able to provide these capabilities to our information workers. What we realized was that there were some internal tensions between IT and the security professionals and the compliance professionals. So we really made a big announcement 2 weeks ago about how we will create a security center and a compliance center, and really coming up with these personas specific to the type of work those compliance officers or security officers do, so that they can actually do the work they want to do. Now, that's the piece that from a tech point of view, we are simplifying the experience. The reality is that I think you and I have been talking about this for ages, about the cultural shift still needs to happen, and it is forums like AIIM and people like Microsoft and others still need to have that conversation to make sure that the folks on both sides of the aisle are still talking to one another. But at least from a technology point of view and a solution point of view, we are making it easy, building the personas, but I don't want to lose the fact that you know, the human element still needs to happen, right? No matter how much tech we provide.
Yeah, it's really funny. When I go back to the first topic about rot, it's really easy to identify rot in somebody else's business unit, and people are very reluctant to identify rot in their own business unit.
That's right. That's right.
So let's turn a little bit to, I just have a couple of quick slides that I want to do on this question of machine learning. And the first one, what I wanted to do is put a little bit of an edge on this question of the data explosion. And so this is actually a data point that we have not released yet. It's a survey that will be released probably in about 2 or 3 weeks or so, which is we just asked people this pretty simple question. You know, think about the huge amounts of data and information currently coming into your organization and call that X. What do you predict this volume will be in 2 years Notice that this isn't like 5 years, this isn't 10 years, this isn't out in the future. These are some pretty startling numbers when it comes to the dimension of the data explosion that people have to deal with, which then implies, again, what we've been talking about earlier, that you need automated approaches and automated strategies in order to somehow get ahead of this curve, or else you'll be sort of falling further and further and further behind. And so we do see evidence of this, when we ask people about their spending plans related to some of the more forward-leaning kinds of intelligent information technologies that are out there, things like automated document classification, automated PII identification, assignment of metadata and taxonomies, standardizing the input of information into the organization, AI, those kinds of things. So what you can see on this slide is, and I find this encouraging, it's not complete, and organizations are starting down this path. But if you go back to that slide a ways back, people are spending a lot of time and money on BPM and on records management right now, and they're looking for ways to try and adapt those strategies to the data explosion and to lean forward into some of these edgier AI and machine learning technologies. And so I think at this point, I will be quiet, and I'm going to shift it over to you, and I know you're going to talk about this, and I think also then do a bit of a demo, which would be kind of interesting to see along the way. So why don't you talk about this question of, give people a future feel, if you will, for where they go with these with this data explosion.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about ML has a lot to offer for most organizations, including getting a handle on their dark data. And we think about all the data using ML to refine it either out of the box or using custom classifiers. One thing we hear from customers is that most classification products available today are rule-based. And while that is a good start, it doesn't address specific criteria like content and meaning. So what I like to do, John, is that I actually like to invite one of my colleagues who is the guru of machine learning here at Microsoft in the data governance team, Shilpa Ranganathan, to really set the stage for us about the problem statement and how things are working, and then also walk us through an amazing demo to show you how easy it is for us to actually do this machine learning capability. Because one thing that we hear from customers is that, oh my goodness, doing machine learning is really tough and to train the system. So hope for the next few minutes, I'll let Shilpa do some framing of the problem and then actually run through a quick demo.
Thanks, Nishan. It was great hearing both of you talk about automation, et cetera, and how machine learning is a conduit for all of that. So I'll do a little show and tell right now. Basically, the demo is focused on how we're modernizing our toolkit, leveraging machine learning and analytics to help you with the final outcome of being able to automate your compliance and security needs. So we'll focus mainly on data classification. Our goal is to able to identify the data and analyze it, going beyond general rudimentary information like, hey, keywords or pattern analysis, etc., but actually going and understanding what is the context and meaning of that data so that we can extract the business intelligence out of it and present it to you with more insights and analytics. That way you can make your decision-making very appropriate and pinpointed to it. So a few artifacts that we have invested in that I'll call out is this page here. This is the Security and Compliance Center in M365. We have introduced this new tab called Classification Assistant here. So on this page is where you would go and find all your analytics and insights. What are some of these insights that you're going to gain? So we've heard time and again from our customers that, if we talk to our business users, they tell us that, hey, I really don't know what's important, so I'm going to err on the side of caution and keep everything. And then when we talk to the admins, they say, hey, I really don't have a view into the company's data, which means I don't know how much risk I'm carrying, etc. So on this page, you can see some analytics that tell you how much of information is actually classified. More importantly, you will also see information that's coming out that says, what are the different types of data that are available in your organization. And that can lead you into understanding what types of classifiers you want to build for your organization. Also important to look at, these are all the out-of-box or tenant-specific classifiers that you can build or use. More importantly, you can understand which policies they're applying to. And at the end of the day, it's all about how are these performing over a period of time, over the data in your organization, does it solve your needs? So this page is where you would go for all your analytics and insights. Another key point that I wanted to point out here is how would we start using some of these out-of-box classifiers that we have here? If you notice, these are a bunch of out-of-box classifiers, and we'll continue to expand on these areas further. But effectively, the goal is, hey, there is something out there that you can use to quickly bootstrap your classification needs, add it to your workflow, super easy flow. You can come here and simply try out these classifiers by pointing it to an existing SharePoint repository that contains uncategorized information. What it does is goes and analyzes the content and tells you which of the content will meet that classification criteria of contract, and it will recommend that content to you. You as an administrator then can view that recommendation, choose to either commit it if you like it, or simply discard it, and that has no data corruption, etc. to you at all. It's completely safe. It's just a very simple way of trying these things out, bootstrapping it. Addition to that, we've also learned from a lot of our customers that there are certain niche data types that they have in their organizations. For example, let's talk about contracts. Contracts are something everybody does differently in their organization. So how do we sort of train these or build custom niche classifiers for your own needs? So let's take a quick, simple look at how you would set your repository up. This is nothing but a SharePoint repository. You would ingest all your content in, and this is a bunch of unclassified content that you have. I'm sure you already have these repository already in place. All you can do is, within that repository itself, create some folders for the categories that you want to classify content as, give us some samples, and simply point the classification assistant to this repository. What the classification assistant does, what the algorithm does, is literally looks at the samples, analyzes it, extracts the content and meaning, and builds classifiers out of it. Then we execute the classifiers against this repository here, and then again, are in the form of recommendation. This is quickly the page where you'll see all your trained classifiers, all your trainings. Let's quickly view the results for you right here, once your classification is done. Here you'll see a list of all the content that is recommended as classified for this particular category, for example, job description or perm filing, etc. And you can quickly go here using our inbuilt review tool, take a look at what this content is, and this is, you can provide active feedback back to the algorithm. So what it does is it learns from these signals actively from your feedback. It can then be used to, this feedback loop can be used to tune your precision and recall, overall increasing the effectiveness of your classifier and helping you fine-tune your exact needs. So this is how you would build custom classifiers if you have samples already available. But we also know that sometimes there are categories where you have 0 samples available. So what we do for you in that case is, can you see my screen? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So what we do for you in that case is we create intelligent clusters for similar groups, and then identify certain key features out of it so that you can be more efficient in terms of building these classifiers. Here again, these are recommendations only. You as a subject matter expert can view these recommendations, and using our inbuilt review tool can quickly look and provide active feedback back to the training system so that you can fine tune it. So in summary, these elements, what do we see here is that you're able to construct a model that can process a wider variety of documents with improved precision. These can work against both structured and unstructured documents, so can work against emails as well as documents. And at the end of the day, your return on investment is pretty high. I know there is some work that you have to do in order to train these classifiers, etc. But overall, when you fine-tune it, the return on investment is pretty high in terms of cost benefits that apply to your organization. And more importantly, once you create these classifiers, if you'd go back to the slide, please. You can see what we have done here is provided you a pipeline that you can build your classifiers, you can measure and optimize it, you can tune it to your precision needs, and you can publish it, more importantly, monitor it. Once you have these classifiers, now you can use it across different solutions. For example, we were talking about ROT analysis. Now you can use these classifiers to say which items to keep, which items to discard. In terms of data governance, you can associate it with your label flow to classify your content and apply all the different policies that you need. And last but not least, in terms of supervision, where you want to monitor employees for either inconsistent behaviors or even create your own classifiers for insider trading, etc., and use it as part of the supervision pipeline to monitor these employees. So once you have all these classifiers built in, you can just easily plug it into the system and take advantage of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Shilpa. That's really exciting because what we saw there, John, was really to see that built-in capability of machine learning now as part of our platform. So one thing here, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Nishan. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. Just to call to action, I know that's some exciting things that Shilpa showed you. And if you need further information about this, there are some links up on the screen right now. If you want to screenshot these or take a photo, great time to do that. So you can really go even more deeper to learn about this. In addition, there are some additional resources that we'd like to share with you. How to get started, we have a bunch of white papers and also specifically this interactive guide is one of my favorites for folks who want to just get started. We really take you through the journey of how you start setting up your policies all the way to deploying that to your information workers. And also, as we think about governing data, we also think about not only proactively governing data, we also look at reactively. We made some significant amount of investment in the e-discovery area too, but there are some information out here for you to review. With that, John, over to you.
And I think that, Teresa, I think you have some questions that have been percolating up there. So do you want to tee off a few of those?
Sure, yes, I will. And I know, John, you were taking a few of the questions as you were going through the talk. And I also have to admit there are far more questions than we're going to be able to get through. So we're going to just do our best to get to as many as we can right now. And so, Nishan, all of these are going to be directed to you, obviously. Someone is asking about what are all of the what all result sources can be added to this auto classification, on-prem or online only? Like what level can be applied to? For instance, like an entire SharePoint online site collection, Teams, Outlooks, etc. Can you offer a little more information on the auto classification?
Sure. So let me give you two answers, and I'll also see if Shilpa wants to contribute to this. So as we think about auto classification, there is ways of you can auto classify using keyword search across Exchange and SharePoint, where you can have specific types of keywords where you can go find all information related to NDAs or go find all information related to this tax ID ABC. Second, we also have the capability of our DLP templates. We have over 180 different templates, right from including a social security number, GDPR template, to privacy templates, where you can actually apply one of these templates to do that. And then the other piece is that for folks who want to do on-premise or to do another data source from our security capabilities, there's something called the AIP scanner that lets you go and classify information on-prem to say this is restricted, this is highly confidential, this is general, and then we can use our ingestion pipeline to go through that and then do the retention capability. So that's just on the auto classification piece. Anything to add, Shilpa, on the machine learning piece?
I think it's all very similar, Nishant, to what you spoke, even on the machine learning. We're starting with ingesting the data into the cloud and running our machine learning algorithms against the cloud data, against SPO/Exchange. We can also do Teams data.
Excellent.
Nishant, there was a question here that I was kind of intrigued about, which was somebody was talking about the desire that they have tons and tons and tons of information on on-prem servers, and they want to move it to the cloud, in particular to Office 365. They want to get rid of the rot along the way, but the volume kind of scares them. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how people overcome that fear.
Great question. I have a standard philosophy called crawl, walk, run, and I think this is where we have many government agencies, enterprise organizations who want to bet on Microsoft to be the large in-place archive. So the recommendation there is, again, to go through that classification capability that we have through the AIP scanner, John, to go and classify that data and say, let's make sure that we only bring that high-value data in and do a couple of pilots to see how that will all resonate well, and then be able to bring that data in. We had another customer of ours who was a testimony for us at Ignite, was Johnson Controls, and they really took a very holistic approach of really looking at specific types of data that was important to them, and then they went through the sequence, they got that right first, and then they started doing the mass migration into the cloud.
How about there's another question here about auto-classification outside of Office 365 environments and kind of extending into on-prem environments, into non-Microsoft environments, kind of the kind of hodgepodgey kind of existence that most people have. Could you comment on that a little bit?
So when you talk about, so there's the capability that you should take a look at the connectors demo that we showed at Ignite about we are building native connectors to bring data into Office 365. And so really for us, while we provide auto classification capability through this AIP scanner to go classify, where we really want to be continuing to invest is that built-in intelligence and the ML into Office 365. So how we think about it, John, going back to that framework I shared with you, import, govern, monitor, is where our goal is to continue to build more and more connectors to easily bring that data into us to be able to then run the auto classification. So if I were to say, yes, we will do some work around on-prem, yes, we'll do some work around partition, but where the significant investment will be that built-in security and compliance into our platform.
How about there's a question here that talks about a little bit more on the professional level of how do you see the role of, how do you see machine learning and AI ultimately changing the role of records managers within organizations?
It's a really good question. I think we believe that I'm super excited, as you know, that in my past life I was a records manager, to see the capabilities of where we struggled of creating retention schedules, then giving it to these departments to go operationalize a retention schedule. With this capability, we can do that 80-20 the other way around. Machine learning, auto-classifying the information, sharing that information with those, let's call it departmental level records managers, saying here's how we are looking and already classifying your data, make the adjustments like Shilpa showed you of training it, so that way you really are optimizing that records manager's job. Because if you look at where the records managers want to fit, it's really about policy enforcement, evidence of compliance. So now you actually give you a toolkit. Before, a couple of years ago, it was just snake oil. And now we actually are providing these capabilities where a records manager has now a certification of destruction, a compliance report to show how the data is getting classified.
Can I add some?
Absolutely.
Nishan? So the few points that I wanted to add is as we were talking to our customers, some of these things light up in their minds, right? Typically, records managers are people who have this ton of information in their head, and with the amount of information they have, although they're not able to scale that information to all of their information workers so that they can understand the business problems and classify it. So where machine learning is really influential for them and where they want to harness it is to say, okay, you take my subject matter expertise and scale it across my organization. And that's what these training classification kind of does for them is they are inputting their intelligence back into the classifier, and now they can scale to their data needs. And that's sort of pretty liberating for them as they see this, because at this point, if they only have themselves, then they're able to only classify up to 20% of their data. Now, if they can use a machine to help them along the way, then we are able to see that they can get up to at least 80% of their classification needs, which is quite a significant amount of reduction in the risk that the industry carries along. So.
Well, thank you so much. We've been listening to John Mancini of AIIM, who's been helping me here with the Q&A as well. But for Microsoft 365, we've been listening to Nishan De Silva, and we've also been joined by Shilpa Raghunathan. And I hope I pronounced your name properly. I just wanted to just mention a few other things here. Join us in AIIM for the AIIM annual conference coming up in 2019, and we're going to be in San Diego again this year. Last year's conference was sold out, and so just highly encourage you not to miss all of the networking and the interactive learning in AIIM 2019, and it really is interactive. So for more information, go to aimconference.com and to just see the latest of what our team is working on to produce for you and to register for that. And just because we are at the end of our webinar time today, just want to remind you that we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available in a day or two at our resources webinars page. But we will email everyone as soon as we have that ready for you to come back and listen again. Don't forget to download the resources that were to the right of the slide area. Also, please take that feedback survey. I value the time that you put into that. And I certainly very much want to thank our underwriter, Microsoft. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM would not be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you so much, Microsoft, for your sponsorship. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I do want to leave everyone with our speaker's closing thoughts or a key takeaway. And I want to start first with Nishan De Silva from Microsoft 365. Your closing thoughts today.
Thank you, Teresa. When you look at the average Microsoft knowledge worker, rate of the data creation has increased by 20 times over the last 10 years. So my parting thought is really about Microsoft Compliance Solutions are committed to help you achieve modern compliance in the cloud. And really, our goal here is to make sure that as we continue to light up more and more capabilities, we want to keep productivity at the center and not forgetting all the capabilities that we have in Office 365, especially with Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, that with this, as the data explosion happens, I don't want you to be fearful. Even if the volcano erupts, John, we are here.
Thank you, Nishan. And John Mancini of AIIM, your closing thoughts today.
Sure. First of all, just thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, Nishan, for being here today. We really do appreciate it, and especially like the idea of doing the bit of a demo along the way, because it really makes this all kind of a lot more real to people. And just two things I wanted to leave with folks. One is that watch in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I have to write it this week and next week. We're going to be publishing one of our benchmarking surveys, our Industry Watch surveys on automating governance and compliance. The downloads are free during the first 30 days, so just watch for that link and watch for those emails, because it'll give you a lot of really interesting data points in terms of understanding this question of automating governance and compliance. And then the second one is I have a new survey that we're going to be working on in the next couple of weeks. You'll probably get an email about this, and if you could take 10 minutes and give us your perspectives. The focus of this benchmarking exercise are the issues that people are considering as they think about this question of what Office 365 means to their organization, as they think about how and whether they want to migrate into it, as they think about how they integrate other solutions in that context. And I would love to have the perspectives of some of the folks on this call. So just watch for that. So just those things.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. Glad to see you show up and look forward to having you at our next event. For AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time. And have a good afternoon.